There's just so many different things that we need to try and standardize. But I think what you've said, Paul, about standardizing sub-artifacts and the importance of that is, if we're going to be a standard, which we are, we have to standardize. And to standardize, sometimes you just have to accept it isn't exactly what you want. Today we're talking about version 4 of the reference model, but before we do that, this is a journey. I'm very excited to be coming here to present with Paul on this journey. I can see a lot of names that I recognize that are coming up. We've been, so I am Karen Roy. I have been on the TMF journey with the reference model since 2009. I worked at Flex Global, and then I've done a lot of work with CDISC, and I'm now a consultant with Apista, working and supporting TMF. I've been the chair of the TMF Reference Model Steering Committee since it started, and I am handing my crown as Queen of TMF over to the King of TMF, Paul Fenton. So, Paul, there you are. Follow that as an introduction.
That's upline. Thank you, Karen, and I definitely feel very honored to be taking the baton or the crown from you, and also would like to give you a big shout out for everything you've done for the community over the years, which is significant. If we are where we are, it's definitely because of your willpower to move things through and get people together and get people working. So thank you for what you've done. I'm Paul Fenton-Carter. As Karen said, we've both been working together for a long time. I've also been on the steering committee pretty much since just after it was created. Very active in this environment, and also very excited about the direction that we're going in with V4. So looking forward to this continued journey, this long haul flight that we're on, because it is long haul. It's not going to happen overnight, but also very excited to reach the destination.
Absolutely. So I think what might be worth doing, Paul, is actually just starting with a little bit of history, because whilst there are lots of names that have popped up that are people that I think know what we've done over the years, I think it's worth just telling everybody how much we've achieved since we started. So when the TMF reference model started, it was part of the DIA. It was the EDM, Electronic Document Management Group, Electronic Document Management Group, and it was all around ECCD. And the TMF was like these few little documents. If you just sort out the TMF, it'll all be fine. And a lady called Lisa Mulcahy and I got together and we were approached, and we said, yeah, no problem. Take us about 6 weeks. We should be done and dusted in 6 weeks. We then started and realized that we weren't going to be done and dusted within 6 weeks. I think an important thing to remember for those of you who are working in TMF now, especially for those of you who are maybe a bit younger than us and have only been doing it for, 5 years or whatever, it's probably all digital for you, or mostly digital. When I started as a CRA in, who knows when, it was all paper. It was just piles and piles of paper behind my desk. Sorry, that doesn't sound good from a filing perspective, that then got filed in the TMF. And really we were thinking paper. So when we started off with the reference model, it was very much about how do we organize these trial level folders, these site level the country level folders and site level folders. And that was the big sort of focus in a lot of ways. We got everybody together. We got the community together. And what I love about this community, and for anybody who hasn't been in this community for a long time, we are truly a family of people that share our ideas. We don't have any commercial tension between everybody. It's just, we're all there for the greater good of TMF. So we all pulled our TMF indices and we pulled them together and we created version 1 of the reference model. We created version 1. And if anybody wants to know details about the reference model, there is actually a video on the CDISC website, which gives you the structure of the TMF reference model and the zones and the sections and the artifacts and the whys and wheres and all of that. So we started off with the TMF reference model version 1. we sat down with Andy Fisher from the MHRA, Cynthia Keppinger from the FDA, and we sort of fine-tuned it and turned it into version 1.1. And then over time, we added a bit about investigators, a bit about devices, a bit about process. All these little bits came in, and we sort of we extended our Excel spreadsheet. Still very much an informal approach. Then what happened was DIA said to us, you know what? We can't own a product anymore. So we said, okay, fine. We'll own it separately. So we actually took a step back, and separated from the DIA. They still supported us completely. It just wasn't in the name. We formalized the steering committee, which is what we now have, 14 people running and controlling the path of the reference model. We released the exchange mechanism, which was basically how we can move things between different systems. It was a great effort, but there was definitely something that was restricting and stopping what we needed. And anyway, we released the next version 3.1, 3.2, blah, blah, blah. And then we sat down and we said, you know what? We really need to be able to move into the future. And what we have won't allow us to move into the future. We therefore need to become part of an organization. So we looked at lots of organizations and joined CDISC. CDISC as a standards body, if you want to know more, it's all over the website. And we by joining CDISC, it gave us the ability to utilize databases and libraries and standards processes and connections with the regulators, et cetera, et cetera. So very much gave us a home, gave us a place to be. But we want to put this thing in this reference model into the standards. We want to create it as a standard. And what we realized was that actually there's quite a lot of work that we need to do to get the reference model ready to be full version 4. So, we said, okay, maybe we need to look at how we're going to change it. Now, there's another factor that was huge, and that's the regulatory evolution. So what happened was we had all these different regulations that were coming in. Now, we're not going to go through all of them today, but in Europe, we had the CTIS, the Clinical Trial Information System, where basically we have a centralized way of applying for approval for studies. And the challenge with that is lots of documentation changed. We have the risk-based approaches coming in, ICHE 6R3, and all of that started changing how we could work. And these are all the reasons why we started saying, you know what? Version 4 is going to be a lot bigger than just an update of the artifacts or the sub-artifacts, etc. So we started looking at that, and there were lots of other things that were affecting what we were doing. So I think the first thing is everything's turned digital. We are in a 3D world working with a 2D spreadsheet. Everyone loves the spreadsheet. And just before anybody panics, we will always be able to take out your Excel spreadsheet. So don't worry about that. But there's no doubt about it that an Excel spreadsheet doesn't give us the flexibility. And we're going to cover off a lot more of that as we go through things. And it's not just about taking the documents and saying this is where they go. We need to be able to manage those documents. And we need to be able to look at the data behind it. And so realistically, the challenge that we were facing were not just regulations affected the artifacts, regulations affected what was in it. We were also challenged by the fact that all the data associated with it was going to be a challenge. So we took a decision, that the reference model V4 was going to be the first TMF digital standard. Now, there's been a million questions. It's very easy to just use a word like digital standard. So, I guess the question is, what is a digital standard, and why are we so focused on transforming the reference model? And Paul, this is your baby to talk about what a digital TMF is and why we're so focused on it.
Great. Thanks for that background, Karen. It's really useful, I think, to understand the journey that we've come on so far. and where we're at. But as you said, we're moving towards this digital TMF standard, this first standard that's really designed for the digital world that we live in. So I want to sort of talk about what are the characteristics of a digital TMF. And as I was thinking about this, I identified sort of 6 key characteristics which stood out. I think the first thing is that a digital TMF is composed of records that are born digital. So what do I mean by born digital? It sounds a bit weird as a term. Born digital means that there's no paper. This was something that was born electronic. If it's a document that's been signed, well, it's been signed digitally. It's not been signed on paper and then scanned. It's not a PDF rendition. It's really truly something that's been created digitally and is maintained digitally. That's really important. Digital TMF is also an environment that is interoperable. As we know, TMF contains artifacts that come from many different organizations and many different systems. And we need to have much better interoperability, and digital TMF and digital TMF standards really start to open up those doors and allow us to be truly interoperable. Digital TMF is also metadata rich. So the goal is that, as we move forward, we start to get more and more data focused and less document focused. And so digital TMF is also data driven. And so the idea is that we can extract data or unlock this data from all of these different assets that we have, and populate our metadata values with that data so that we can better tell the story, better understand what we're looking at without having to open a whole bunch of different documents. Digital TMF is also standardized. It has to be based on the standard. And digital TMF is all about digital interaction. So interacting with the content that we had digitally to be able to extract knowledge. Now, when thinking about sort of where we were going with the reference model and how we sort of came to the conclusion that we should be really trying to put something in place which is really focused on digital and the way that we work today, we sort of went through this path. So why do we need to become a digital TMF standard? Number one, it's just going to be a lot easier to find information. If things are digital, we can dig into that information much more easily and find information and synthesize that information. So it really gives us something back. It also gives us the ability to develop more data management type approaches for quality and risk management. And this is a really big area of focus right now, right? Quality and risk management, especially as ICH E6 R3 is on the doorstep. We need to take risk-based approaches to TMF management and study management as a whole. We need to improve quality. And to do that, we need to look at how maybe we work elsewhere within our industry, and especially within data management as we start to have more data and documents. We need more granularity. Right now, the way that the TMF reference model is organized is primarily a filing structure. That's primarily what it is. Now, of course, we do have some metadata that allows us to define aspects of that filing structure. So is this an artifact that exists at the site level, at the country level, those kinds of things. But we kind of need more. And today, as an industry, we actually use quite a lot of metadata within our TMFs. It's just not standardized. And so we need to have more granularity with more metadata. But also we need to look carefully at our artifacts and sub-artifacts. Also, another challenge that we have, because today artifacts tend to be quite high level, and don't always fit that well. And we also have a whole bunch of sub-artifacts that were not formalized. And so we really need to sort of start to look at that and standardize more on those sub-artifacts, and better organize them, in relation to our artifacts to tell a better story. We need, much better interoperability. We tried to do this initially with the exchange mechanism standard and had sort of mixed success. there's a lot of focus right now in the industry around interoperability. And there are really important initiatives like digital data flow and the digital protocol, which are going to start to drive a lot more interoperability between the various different clinical systems. And TMF needs to be part of that because we're really at the heart of everything when it comes to clinical operations and running clinical trials. And so we need to be part of that picture. And to do that, we obviously need to be a digital standard ourselves. We need to have more proactive TMF management, and we need to leverage the information that we have in the TMFs to better manage our studies and better, work smarter, work better. And I think that as we start to have things much more structured and standardized, we can really start to leverage the information that we have, and for the gold mine will be finally open for business. Because for me, the TMF really is a gold mine that we've not really tapped into in a significant way. And then finally, our ultimate goal is we want to have recognition from the regulators. Obviously, we've had lots of discussions and consultations with the regulators, and they've been very interested in what we've been doing. And I think that, most inspectors nowadays, obviously, they know the reference model structure. They're comfortable with it. It's a good thing, but it's still not something that is mandated. And it's still not something that's formally recognized by the regulators. And I think that if we become a digital TMF standard, and I'm kind of underlining the word standard, then there's a better chance that we will get that recognition from the regulators, and it will become a standard that is mandated by the regulators. So that's really what is driving us towards this digital TMF standard. Now, very quickly, just to sort of put everything into context, there are various different components that we're really focusing on. Obviously, we're focusing on the existing structures and artifacts, sub-artifacts, metadata, etc. But we're also, as part of our effort, looking outside. We're looking at things like the digital protocol, because we feel that the digital protocol will have a big impact on the way that we manage TMF in the future and the way that we navigate TMF in the future. Within the M11 digital protocol, there are a whole bunch of different parameters around study design, which are going to be really important for us to be able to drive what we should expect to see in our TMF and how we present the information within our TMF. We also want to think about...
Paul,
Yes.
can I interrupt you for a second? I'm just thinking not everybody on this call might know what the digital protocol is.
Yeah, you're right.
Can you just give a little bit of this is where it's come from? Because I'm always astounded when it's just not something that people have talked about that much. So maybe just a bit of an idea of big picture what it is.
Sure. So M11 digital protocol is from ICH. It's a standard which allows us to define all of the various different sections that we typically find in a protocol in a machine readable format. So it truly becomes digital. It's a standard that is very similar to the common protocol template that was designed by Transcelerate. And the idea is that we have all of the protocol information encapsulated in a format that we can distribute to all of the various different systems and stakeholders so that they can consume that information and then use it to configure the various different systems, but also making sure that everybody is using the same version of the truth. So today what happens is quite often there'll be like a paper protocol or not paper, but a protocol that's written in Microsoft Word, for example, and then signed, and we get a PDF, which we then distribute. And then everybody sort of sits down and tries to interpret that to be able to then set up all of their processes and their systems to run the clinical trial. The idea with the digital protocol is they don't need to interpret the document. They can actually just tap into the data that's contained within the digital protocol to be able to configure their processes and systems. So that's really what it is. It's a very sort of structured, machine readable and human readable format that we use to write protocols moving forward. And it's still a draft format, right? So it's not final yet.
I think it's important to note, though, Paul, that actually, because you often hear about these things and you go, oh, it's going to be 5 years. It's not going to be 5 years. There are companies out there that are currently producing digital protocols at the push of a button, even though M11 is not finalized.
Yeah.
People are getting ahead of the game and then making sure that they align to the regulations moving forward. I don't know about you, but I see within 2 years there being a huge change in this industry around digitalization.
Yeah, exactly. And I think digital protocol is the first piece.
Yeah.
And you're right, Karen, it's moving very quickly. And it's, obviously it's coming from ICH. So it's going to be mandated, right? I mean, that's what happens. Very similar to, ECTG from ICH is mandated. Everybody has to use it. So you're right. People are getting ahead of the curve. And I think that people are seeing the benefits, of having this. But I think in the future, we'll also see there will be other, similar kinds of, artifacts or documents that become digital. So for example, your statistical analysis plan will become digital. Your clinical study report will become digital. So all of these different artifacts will end up having a digital format. And that's really, really important, because all of a sudden it's going to be a lot easier to be able to extract the information that's contained within those artifacts, present it to tell a better story, but also use it to manage our studies, to drive our processes. So it's a very exciting time, I think. And this is one of many. Right now, what we're doing on the TMF side is really looking at, ICH M11 and how it's structured, but also the data points that are contained within. So the data points that are contained within are being encapsulated in a standard that's being developed by CDISC, in collaboration with, obviously, Transcellerate, with ICH, with the industry, called USDM, so Unified Study Definitions Model. And this standard basically allows us to encapsulate all of the digital protocol information, and also information from other areas. And so it's kind of like it's becoming this sort of logical model for clinical trial information. And this is really important because the TMF needs to be able to consume or sometimes provide information in that format. So we're looking very closely at this as we go through this journey of digitizing the TMF reference model to make sure it's aligned with USDM and that we're part and parcel of the digital data flow initiative. And so this is, we have teams that we're setting up to really focus on this. And so I'm going to leave it there. There's a lot of other aspects to this, but the talk today is more high level. But if anybody wants to know more about this, we definitely will be doing more sessions later on in this forum, on a lot of these subjects.
I have one question for you, Paul, though. As a non-technical person, mostly more TMF and documents, how much do you think somebody would, looking through the the people here, sorry, not the agenda, the people here, there's a lot of people who are head of TMF and this, that, and the other, so more business than technical. Yeah. How much do they need to know about USDM? Is this going to be dealt with by the vendors and the IT departments, or are people actually expected to really dig in and understand USDM?
I think that people need to know it exists. But I don't think they need to know about the nitty gritty necessarily. I think that the vendors obviously definitely need to know, because they're the ones that kind of the custodians of the data, if you like, and the functionality that we provide. But I also think that as we evolve as an industry, we'll start to see new job functions. And so we're going much more towards the types of job functions that we see within data management, where we're in data management, we have data managers who define based on the protocol, well, this is the data we need. This is the information we need. And then this is how we're going to manage it. This is how we're going to clean it. This is how we're going to ensure that we have sufficient levels of quality. all those things are done by data managers. Within the TMF world, up until now, we've been very much in a mode where we've been focused more as archivists. We're going out, we're getting artifacts which traditionally have been documents. We're organizing them into structures, and then we're archiving them away. That's going to change. Our archivists are going to transform into data managers. And the heads of TMF and the leaders on this call, obviously, they need to understand this change that's happening and understand the different components that are part of this change, but also understand, well, how is it going to impact their teams? What are the kinds of things that we're going to have to start to do in the future as we move more and more towards a data-driven approach? And then also, how do I take this very technical environment and explain it to your everyday clinical operations people? So I think that's where the vendors come in as well. The vendors can help in putting together, leveraging the power of this and putting together better solutions, that make it easier to manage these large volumes of data that we're now dealing with. But yeah, it's a good question, important question.
And obviously, clearly, it's making people excited, because there's lots of comments about being excited, which is great.
Yes, and we're excited too, right? I mean, you can. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
Karen, I want to pass it back to you, and I'm kind of interested in, obviously we've been talking a lot about V4. It's a big deal. It's the first digital TMF standard. But there's a lot of different aspects to it. There's a lot of different components to V4, right? So can you maybe walk us through that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's really interesting. You've been talking about the data-driven approach and the digital protocol, and we've got that whole path moving along at the same time as, sorry, I don't know if I should be using my hands on a webinar, but I can't help it. We've got the whole path of the digital protocol, and the fact that the protocol says what committees you need, and you can have the requirements set up in the TMF. And then you've got version 4, which is bringing in all sorts of different aspects together, and it's all going to merge together. I guess this is why V4 is so big. I mean, when you look at the reference model and what we put in originally, let's just pick one of the things around this table, metadata. So we said, right, we're going to have standardized metadata, and we put a few little pieces of information in. We never really did a big job on that. We sort of had a little metadata group, and we started looking at that, and then but we never really nailed down to, okay, these are the pieces of metadata that we need for this artifact, or these are the pieces of metadata that we need for this sub-artifact. And that's a whole conversation, I think, that we're going to have around sub-artifacts as well. But so therefore, there's an enormous amount of work to be done just on that piece. Yeah. Take real-world evidence. Well, actually, no, let's come back to RW. Let's talk about milestones. So milestones, we have them in there. Milestones have been aligned to different TMF artifacts. But actually, milestones have become more and more and more important, because if you're going to start thinking about digital data flow and CTMS data flowing through, you need to have things, it needs to be fixed standardized through all the different systems. And you will be able to start getting more completeness information using your milestones. You talk about types of studies. So let's talk about RWE. Is there anybody on the call today who is involved in RWE studies? I will give you a little bit of warning. If your name appears, I'm going to be coming after you. So just remember that. But if you work in RWE, for example, real world evidence, if anybody isn't involved in that, we had an exercise a while back where we said, right, let's define a real world evidence index. And we started doing it, and then we wanted to put it into the reference model, but we couldn't. And the main reason we couldn't is because there's some very basics, like RWE, it's called a study, not a trial. So immediately everything has to change the word study, but you can't change the TMF for a clinical trial into the word study. So you've immediately got this disconnect. Well, you can map it, etc. So we're like, we want to be able to pull it out. So it's called a study reference model. It's called studies. It's an RWE study model, etc. And so that he created a separate document, which is sitting on the website, and everyone was like, some people know about it, some people don't. The plan now, and it's being reinvigorated, which is why I'm saying, is anybody involved in RWE? That's funny. I just got a text about it. So somebody doesn't want to put their name up, but that's fine. I'll forgive you. But I think the getting people involved from an RWE. Thank you, Vincent. From an RWE perspective, to take that and turn it into a proper reference model, and then to have it in the database so that you could go in and effectively say, give me the RWE study index, and you'll be able to pull it out. Very, very important. So I will be passing on people's names and information to the RWE group if you want to get involved. If you don't, you don't have to. Device. Now, we've done a lot of work on device, but again, a document in a device study is called a different thing, and we've tried to work it through so that you could use it in both places. Now we're going to be able to say, give me my device index, and we can make it really granular for devices. The other one, and I don't know if everybody on here knows about it, is the investigator side. Now, brilliant. I like all these volunteers. We've had investigator columns in the TMF reference model for years. But we've never had an investigator, site file reference model or investigator reference model. And now we do. It's being led by two site people, Aaron Knight and Matt Lowry, which is brilliant. Jaylee Toth and Dawn Neckham are the steering committee leads. We are pulling together a proper, investigator site file index. And this will be part of the TMF reference model, because the TMF is the documents at the investigator site and the sponsor/CRO. So we will be covering all of that. And this is all going to be coming together to create the version 4. So can you start seeing how complicated this is going to get? And why we have, it's nice, Karen. I'm delighted as well. Why we have such a big project that we're undertaking. Now, I would say one thing about, in fact, I think if you go to the next slide.
Yeah.
On the next slide, we've got, the overview of the fact that the last big version was in 2015, and that we need to refresh it. But if you go to the next slide, the next slide is really around the goals of, the reference model, and what we're trying to do and how we're trying to bring everything together. Now, one of the things I know I've been asked many times before, when I worked as a vendor and when I'm working as CDISC is, do we always have to be on the latest version of the reference model? The answer is no, you don't. It's not a standard today. Hopefully it's going to be a standard tomorrow. Hopefully the regulators, it will be a standard tomorrow, but we hopefully the regulators will actually endorse it at some stage. We're still working on the MHRA on that and others. But I think the important thing that we're going to do with version 4 is one big change, because we understand the impact on the vendors, the sponsor companies is going to be large. So we want to get it right, which is why it's taking quite a long time to sort of pull the whole thing together. It's taking quite a long time to work out how we collect the changes. It's taking a long time to work out how long it's going to take us to get to the changes. And I think we just need to make sure that we get it right. We align with the regulations. We need ICH E6R3 to be out so that we can make sure we've covered everything off in there, because the plan is that we're not going to be redoing this over and over. We will tweak it after that. But if you think about 2015 till now, it's going to be 10 years between the two. So we would hope that we wouldn't do version 5 until at least 10 years time. So I think you should be able to sort of like effectively streamline it down so that we get it right this time around.
Yeah.
One of the things, Paul, that I wanted to ask you about version 4, though, because we had so much debate about it, was the sub-artifacts. And you had decided to formalize the sub-artifacts. So what's the big deal there, and why is it so important?
The big deal. So the big deal is that, I mean, obviously when we started to define sub-artifacts at the time, and obviously we had a list of around 600 or so sub-artifacts across all of the various different zones and artifacts. The big deal was that they're actually, there's a lot of them, and so it's not easy to manage them. And in fact, we probably could have had a lot more, but we sort of limited it. The big deal was also that they were just suggestions at the time. They weren't formalized. It was basically, well, this is a list of sub-artifacts that you could potentially use. The problem with that is that as we become a standard, it's quite difficult for us to sort of manage things that could potentially be used, and also have organizations, sort of doing a lot of changes, within that list of sub-artifacts. Because if, you think about interoperability and stuff like that, it's very difficult for me to know what I'm receiving if it's not standardized, or what I'm sending. So we did sort of have a lot of discussion around sub-artifacts and whether we should actually try and formalize them. There was even discussion around whether sub-artifacts were actually just artifacts, in their own right, and whether we should just expand the number of artifacts that we had. We landed on the agreement that we would still keep the sub-artifact level, that we would with version 4 go through and actually review all of them and try and harmonize them through the controlled terminology process, and just make sure that sub-artifacts across all zones were using the same terms and things like that, and also we would sort of define at the right level. And so now what we're going to be doing is going through and formalizing them and harmonizing them, but also, for example, defining metadata for them. And again, if we want to apply standards subsets of metadata to sub-artifacts, well, we kind of need to formalize it. So the reason why we decided to include them in V4 is we needed to formalize. Now, that doesn't mean to say that organizations won't have their own additional sub-artifacts, and I think that's okay. They can still add their own sub-artifacts, but at least we'll have a core set that are formalized and agreed across the industry. And I think over time, because we're moving towards sort of having all of this in a digital platform and not in an Excel spreadsheet, it's going to be easier to expand those sub-artifacts. And even for the various different flavors that we were talking about, real world evidence or medical device, the terminology isn't quite the same. Well, we can have alternative terminology for those things, or even alternative sub-artifacts that are very specific to medical device or to real world evidence. So I think that it makes sense for us at this point to move towards standardized sub-artifacts.
Okay. It's interesting. I've just been reading the questions and comments that have come, and Deepa's made a very interesting comment about the reference model and the fact that it's made it more complicated. And whilst it's a brilliant idea, we have areas where people multiple file, and sub-artifacts, I think, are, and the reason I mention it in relation to sub-artifacts is I think sub-artifacts are one of those things that actually causes more stress sometimes to be like, well, where do I put it and what do I put it in? And that we absolutely acknowledge the fact that the reference model there are areas of confusion. So Deepa, we would love you to get involved, especially if you have, sorry, is it Anita? Hang on a second. I think it's deeper, Anisha. We would love you to get involved. So email me, kroy@cedis.org. I put my email address up there. Email me at that. And can I just ask anybody else who said they're involved in RWE, email me at kroy@cedis.org as well. And I'll get you involved as, I'll put you in the right place to get you involved, because I think we do have confusion with some of the places. I mean, investigator training is a perfect example of, site training, site qualification, site rate. That was where things is a really good example. Then, comments about, where you have lots and lots of empty folders. The beauty of being able to have version 4 as a digital is you could then create a TMF structure with just the things you need. So you don't have a bunch of empty folders, because you'll be able to drive. I don't need any of this. There is no IP. You can lose the whole section, as an example. And I think that's important. And anybody who on here who has opinions and wants to get involved, email me or Paul. I mean, and it doesn't matter who you email, but, and we can point you in the right direction. At the end, we're going to have some volunteer stuff as well, because I think, there's just so many different things that we need to try and standardize. But I think what you've said, Paul, about standardizing sub-artifacts and the importance of that is, if we're going to be a standard, which we are, we have to standardize. And to standardize, sometimes you just have to accept it isn't exactly what you want. I mean, at the very, very, very beginning, we had an alternative name column, because everybody called everything a different name. So we had the ICH name, and then we had every other name that existed under the sun. And at some stage, we lost that column, because we said, you know what? Actually, people need to just take on the name of the reference model. It doesn't matter what you call it. It's still the same thing. It doesn't give you a better drug, as such, from having gone through all the research. So let's just sort of standardize it. So, right. I think
I want to add something just to, because it can be a little bit daunting sometimes as well when we say, we need to standardize. It sort of seems a little bit rigid, but I think as we move into this sort of standardized TMF world, we're also thinking carefully about flexibility and how we can also introduce flexibility into the standard. Because TMF is so broad and wide-reaching, every study is a little bit different. So we do need to sort of think carefully about how can we also provide some flexibility whilst remaining standard. And that's definitely one of our focuses as we move through this. I also think I can see there's like a lot of really good ideas or input in the chat here. I almost want to download it and provide it to the team, But one of the first things that we're going to do is we're going to be going out to the community to get your input. We need your feedback. We want your ideas and what you would like to see. And so I think that's our starting point, which we're about to start on. So maybe we can talk a little bit about how are we going to do this? How are we going to structure it? If you agree, Karen.
Absolutely. And we just so everyone's asking the question of when is it going to be available. And I think we can talk about the structure, and then we can talk about when it's going to be available. But to the person that said is it going to be available at the end of V4, at the end of Q4? The answer is no.
No. No, definitely not. I mean, we would love it to be, obviously, but there is a lot of work that needs to happen. So we'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end of today's session. But I just want to sort of talk a little bit about how we've organized ourselves and how we're going to move forward. So this is kind of a bit like an organogram, if you like, where we have, at the top, the CDISC leadership team, because obviously we're part of CDISC. We have to follow CDISC process and protocol. We take our lead from CDISC leadership, and they support us in our initiatives. We also have the TMF Reference Model Steering Committee that is still guiding very much this effort as the custodians of the TMF Reference Model. We then have a core V4 management committee, which is made up of a small group of people that are really sort of helping to put in place the processes for us to get from A to B. So all the different things that we need to do to get to that final version of V4, and also just to sort of make sure that everything keeps on track, to coordinate things, deal with challenges or problems that are going to occur as we go through the process. We then have sort of two core groups of volunteers. We have an SME group of volunteers, and this is composed of the community as a whole. So this is the very, it's quite a big group of people that are all part of the TMF Reference Model community. And those are the first people that we're going to be reaching out to get their input. So all of you that have put sort of ideas or things you'd like to see in the chat here, make sure that you also provide that input when we call out to the community for you to provide that. And that's really our starting point. We want to hear what you guys think we should be doing in terms of changes or things that you would like to see, say, in terms of sub-artifacts or even just general comments of how you would like the reference model to evolve. Now, obviously, there's going to be a lot of input. It's not going to be that easy to consume all of that because everyone here is a volunteer, but we will be doing our best to take that into account. Now, there will be a central triage committee, which is made up of, I think it's around 13 or 14 individuals that are all industry experts in various different areas and in different domains, that have agreed to contribute time to actually look at what the community is asking for, and also to work with the various different zone teams. So there are zone teams for process zones 1 through 11, and also the working groups. So there are different working groups. Karen mentioned some of them. So ISF, real world evidence. There'll also be a vendor working group as well. The vendors have agreed to come together and work together to push through what's required for digital TMF and V4. And all of these different groups will be interacting with the triage committee to come up with the list of changes that we want to make for V4, be it to artifacts, to sub-artifacts, metadata. All of the different components that we saw earlier will all be going through this triage committee. And they'll also be trying to make sure that we harmonize things, that we come up with something that's very, very well packaged as a whole, rather than having discrepancies between different zones, which we tend to see still today. This group of SMEs obviously are being led by the triage committee, and the triage committee will also have interactions with the other working groups, which are more around the development of the standard itself. So this is what we're calling the standards operations teams. And there are 4 different groups within the standards governance or standards operations. We have a group that's focusing on digital data flow and ICH M11. So making sure that we're aligned with the USDM standard, with what's going on with digital data flow, making sure that TMF is at the table and is integrated with all of those different efforts. And also looking at how do we consume and leverage ICH M11 as it evolves and as it becomes final. Because there's a good chance that ICH M11 may become final as V4 becomes final. So we want to make sure that we're aligned. There will also be an eTMF metadata team. So this team will be focusing on developing a metadata standard for both indexing and operational metadata. So the indexing metadata is pretty much the metadata that we kind of have today already within the reference model, but we'll be looking at that. We'll be comparing, all of the various different vendors and what they're doing. We'll be looking out at the industry and trying to come up with a standard set, which is formal. And then also looking at some of the operational metadata that we would also want to capture on various different types of artifacts. And this will probably be done in a staged approach, because if you think about metadata, it could be enormous. There could be many, many, many different metadata values that we would want to be able to capture or collect as part of the trial master file to help us better understand and tell a better story. we're realistic that we need to take a staged approach. And so initially there'll probably be a subset that's defined that will be sufficient for V4 and our current needs. And then as digital data flow evolves, as we get more and more digital standards, we'll also be expanding beyond V4 on that metadata standard. The third team is all around controlled terminology, and that team is already in place. They've already done a first pass. Karen has been very involved in that as well. That's been a really successful exercise. So now all of the artifacts, for example, are encoded using standard terms or controlled terms that are all part of a much bigger glossary within CDISC, and that's managed by the National Cancer Institute for ensuring that we're all defining things in the same way, that we all understand things in the same way. And that's really important to standards as well, especially if we have a lot more interoperability. And then finally, there'll be a library team, which is all about the tools that we need to manage our standard moving forward, and having, as Karen said, all these different flavors and just managing all of this complexity, because obviously V4 is much bigger in terms of complexity than version 3 and the previous versions of the reference model. So this is something that is in the process of being put in place right now, and there will be calls out to the community, to volunteers, for everybody to get involved. So Karen, how do people get involved? Talk us through it.
Well, there is so basically, if you want to be involved, feel free to email me and Paul, but and we will point you in the right direction. But essentially, to do anything, you have to join up as a volunteer. And the QR code on the screen means that you sign up as a volunteer for CDISC. It's not a very complex process, but you then get added into the email lists and the communications around the volunteer piece. So that's the most important. And even if you get involved, we have to then backtrack to make sure that you're involved as a volunteer as well. And then there are different people that you can get. You can have have contact about being involved in zone teams, where that's directly focused on the different zones, or in a working group and you've got Kathleen and Kate and Layla. If you've emailed me today or you've emailed Paul today, what we'll do is we'll connect you with the relevant people from what you've said, because some people have emailed me about RWE. Please do email me about RWE if you want to get involved. Just because we really want experts. We need people who know about RWE to get involved. And then we will get you on as a volunteer, and then you can become part of this story and this journey. And I think it's really important to be part of it, because we are changing the face of TMF again, and you want to be part of this. You don't want to sort of be left out. And then you come and join us at the conferences. If you're in Europe, we've got the CDISC Interchange in Geneva, where there's going to be 2 whole tracks and sections talking about TMF. And then if you like to talk about TMF and you like to sing, there's the CDISC Interchange in Nashville in the States in October next year. Sorry, I'm doing a few...
We're on stage, Karen.
Absolutely. Did you not know that that's the opening? We have to sing. For those of you who've been to the interchanges, you know that we are relatively renowned for being a little silly. And for those of you who don't know, TMF is obviously too much fun. So, getting more serious again, there's lots of places that you can get involved and you can be part of this journey. And we want everyone to be to do the silly walk. Perfect. And that is absolutely perfect. Absolutely. We're all going to do the silly walk together. But we need to actually all be Ministry of Silly TMF. But I've got those things go around in my head now. And you shouldn't have done that. Now I'm going to be thinking about what we can do next. But it is really important to get involved. And I think that means that we are approaching the end, but I think it's up to you to become part of this journey. If there's something you don't like about the reference model, if there's something you think is silly, confusing, etc., Don't just sit there and think, oh, this is confusing or whatever, and I don't like it. Send an email, get involved, be part of it, and you'll be able to influence it. There's no doubt. Sorry, but I've just seen there's a question here, Vincent, a specific work stream focused on TMF compliance quality review. So, Vincent, there has actually been quite a lot of work done on TMF quality and TMF compliance metrics. If you go onto the website, the CDISC website, there's a whole section there that you can get involved with. And sorry, I've got the chat up, and it's really not a good idea to put a chat up. Thank you, Alicia, for that wonderful skit. There is a lot of work that's already been done. If you go to CDISC and then you go to resources and you go to TMF Reference Model and click on that, there's loads of stuff on metrics, etc. And we will be refreshing all of those initiatives on time. As soon as V4 is out, we will then go, okay, now we've got V4. Now we need to go and say, how do the metrics change with V4? How does the quality review change with V4, etc., etc.?
Yeah, absolutely. And then just, the other thing is, if you're not signed up as a volunteer, it doesn't mean to say you can't still give input.
Yep.
And we will be sending you out information on how you can give just input very easily as a community. That's really, really important. This is community driven, always has been, always will be.
Absolutely.
I think we are getting close to the end of our time, Karen. And I know that me and you could sit here for hours talking about this, but unfortunately we have to go back to our day jobs.
I know.
Thank you for hosting this with me, and I'm going to pass it back to Bart, who is going to say a few final words.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys. That was very informative. I think for a lot of listeners, it gave them a little bit of insight in terms of V4, some of the nuances and details around that. And we hope that it was informative for everyone else. And that they got, like I said, they got a little bit more information on the latest TMF V4. I want to say thank you very much to Karen and Paul, and of course all the listeners on today's episode. And that we'll catch you guys on the next episode in December. So thank you all very much for tuning in. Take care.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the State of TMF. If you liked today's episode, hit the subscribe button, view the full episode with video on YouTube, and follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook to see the sometimes entertaining and always resourceful content we post every single day. See you at the next episode.